Well, it's kind of the better you get, the better you better get.
Right.
Because the better you get, the more
that.
mature you get, the more mature you get, the more complex your life gets. Not complicated, but complex.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Aaron Dignan, and I'm joined by my co-host, Rodney Evans.
Hello, hello.
And today we are also joined by David Allen, the founder of the David Allen Company and the author of Getting Things Done, aka GTD, aka how lots of the people at the Ready get their stuff off their plate and move on. David, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, guys. Happy to join. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. On today's episode, we're going to talk about getting things done now. So kind of the intersection between your work and the things that you've done, the moment we're in. We'll probably touch briefly on holacracy and both of our experiences with that. We'll bounce around. But in the meantime, we have to check in to get present, to get oriented, to be ready.
We must, and we will. All right. And so as we always do in our Freaky Friday episodes, our illustrious guest will join us in our check-in round. And our question for today is going to be this one. What is something that has recently surprised you? So Aaron, we'll start with you, and then I will go next, and David can finish up for us.
Yeah. So let's see. I guess the thing that has surprised me most lately, and I know this is a very kind of boring observation, is just how irrational the stock market is. I used to think that it was irrational, but I didn't realize the extent to which. And I feel like between the events of The Big Short and '08 and this, I'm like, yeah, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I feel like there are things going on there that are as mysterious to me as anything else in the universe. So I sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong, but I am surprised at that. And in the moment where we have like 20 million people out of work, the market's just like, it's fine. It's like 2018, late 2018 right now, right?
Yes. Also pandemic related, I have been surprised by the variety in response to what's going on, particularly by companies. So I would have expected, based on movies about outbreaks, that when this happens, someone starts to do the thing that they think is the right thing, and then everybody else does that same thing because it seems like the right thing to do. And actually what we're seeing right now is not that at all. And so you have some organizations that are going very people positive in their response to this, and others that are sort of muscling through in much more of like a mercenary, to maybe greed oriented way. And I don't know what part of my naive brain didn't think it would be that way. But it is. And I've been surprised when I read headlines about, us continuing to put our employees in harm's way. So yeah, that's been a somewhat disappointing surprise to me.
I was just going to say, I always say it takes all kinds, but I'm not sure it does. I could do without some of the kinds.
I wish it didn't. Yeah. David, what about you? What's something that has recently surprised you?
Well, I've been doing quite a number of podcasts and interviews over the last couple of weeks since the pandemic started. And, everybody's interested in my take on working from home and, what do you do with that? And, there's a part of me that it shouldn't be a surprise, but it actually is. I haven't worked in an office since 1981. So,
wow.
I kind of scratch my head, so working from home, isn't that cool? I mean, what? Come on, isn't that the way the world is going? And how many people I think are out of their comfort zone, with dealing with now, I have to stay at home. And, surprising to me how broad a swath that is of people that are grappling with out of their comfort zone with that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's wild. The flailing is intense.
The flailing is intense.
So, David, just to get grounded, I guess I'm going to ask a really simple question to start for those. I guess there are people out there that haven't read or maybe haven't recently read your work. What does it mean to get things done? Like, give us the kind of 60-second, worldview so that we can get grounded in that, and then we'll get into the more interesting stuff.
Okay. Well, the way you get things done is you define what done means and what doing looks like and where it happens. There it is. 10-second answer.
We only needed 6 seconds, as it turned out.
And just to dig a tiny bit deeper, what is it about that most people get wrong? Like, what is the present state that doesn't match that?
They spin without a specific desired outcome clarified and structured and focused in front of them. And they spin without a specific next action about how do I allocate my attention and my activities toward moving the needle toward that final outcome. And they're spinning in between all of that. And it creates an overwhelming amount of ambient anxiety.
And you know where I spin still when in my practice is the interplay between all of that clarity and structure and planning and all that with the discipline of my own energy and my own motivation and, being able to be present to the right work at the right time. I still have not mastered that. So if you have any pearls of wisdom on that, on taming your inner ADD demon, that's the last stop on the train for me.
Aaron, what would it be like if you didn't have the problem?
I think I would just sit down and do the right things in the right order.
How would that feel?
I think it would feel highly productive and satisfying.
Great affirmation. So you want to know, there's your desired outcome. So what's your next action?
I think my next action is to try to do that today.
There is no try.
Okay, Yoda.
Grasshopper, come on.
Yeah.
So next action is what would I see you do if you were doing that?
Yeah, I think I would just start the day with the most important, thing on the list and make that the habit.
And how would you do that?
You'd see me at the desk. You'd see me, maybe setting a timer or doing it in a Pomodoro style or something like that. Probably going to bed the right time the night before so that I wake up with the right level of energy and focus and commitment.
And if you don't do that, how would you feel?
I think you just get, a little bit under energized and you end up being more distractible, more, kind of harried, just unfocused.
This may be just a sidebar. Maybe hopefully it's not off tack in terms of where you want to go. But one of the things I learned years ago, especially working with affirmations, which I've done for 40 years, is that it's always a good idea to build in resilience. I love the feeling of being focused on exactly the most appropriate thing I should put my attention on and how good and confident it feels. And when I'm not, that I am gracious with myself and bring myself, as soon as I'm conscious of it, back to the game again.
I like
you
that.
You build in resilience. So you also affirm when I find myself off that game,
right.
It's absolutely fine, to hop back on the surfboard again.
I love that. That's great. So I'm wondering for folks that are already struggling with that, and now you add into that working from home amidst a pandemic with kids, trying to get, some kind of version or semblance of an education with spouses, with partners, with animals and pets. Does that change anything? Does it make it harder? How are you kind of thinking about advising folks in this moment to get things done, or are you letting us off the hook?
Oh, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, it's times like these, that try men's soul, to quote somebody. It's times like these that really test the mettle in terms of how well you manage yourself. And a lot of what getting things done is about is actually giving you some best practices about how you deal with surprise, how you deal with things you don't expect. And, that's why, my second book was called Ready for Anything. And it's really about how do I get present so I can bring myself present again. The problem is when you move into these kinds of major transition changes, and that could be, our testimonials over all these years from getting things done and people that have become practitioners, whereas, wow, I really didn't realize how powerful and useful it was until I bought my house, until I sold my house, until I got divorced, until I got married, until I discovered I have a life-threatening illness, until I suddenly inherited elder care from my mom, until I suddenly yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So it's at those kind of times. And for the most part, most people fall off their self-management game in those kinds of transitions. If you're really mature with, for instance, the getting things done methodologies and best practices and principles, then that's when you step up to them when those things happen. It's like it forces you to say, wait a minute, I need to sit down and empty my head, bring myself to current reality. What's true now? What's my desired outcome now with this changed reality? What's my next step to move the needle toward that? So that's, in spades, the application of the thought process, of getting things done. And this is the kind of time you would need to do that. And not only that, down at the operational side of the game, you would need to say, you need to step back and do some version of the weekly review. Hey, come on, let me lift up a little bit and look around. What's true now? What are the things that have my attention, in terms of the areas of focus and accountability and responsibility? Kids at home now, a home office now. Oh my God, how am I going to manage my team now, et cetera? So defining then what are the sub projects. The outcome is, hey, let me get my life onto cruise control again. That's the big project for a lot of people right now, right? And then, okay, what are the sub pieces of that? What are the things that you're going to need to handle to get your life onto cruise control? Okay, I need to, get a good system set up for my kids at home. I need to make sure I've got a home office set up that's discreet, that's useful for me. So, I need to refine my cockpit. If I don't have one, I need to set one up. If I got one, I need to refine it. So it becomes, when I sit there, I'm in the cockpit and in the game again, et cetera. So what are the projects that need to be defined and the sub outcomes that need to be defined now that you're in the new situation?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And one question that brings up for me, David, is sizing those. So where I see a lot of people get stuck is in the loftiness of their ambition. And, they get sort of the end state visualized, they write down an outcome that feels really right to them. And then the first project that they pick off is way too big to actually create momentum, and they get stuck. So when somebody is trying to create a routine, maybe for the first time amidst this chaos, what do you tell them about what those sub projects and sort of the altitude of those outcomes should be?
Well, the getting things done model is the 5 steps or the 5 stages of how do you get focused and in control anytime, where you capture and clarify and organize and reflect and engage. I didn't make those up. I just identified what you do when you get your kitchen under control or a meeting under control or your desk under control. And so you might need to go to any one of those steps. And so one of the first steps would be, well, what has your attention about any of that? Oh my God, who's going to walk the dog now? Or, how do I handle this? And how do we set up the kids to make sure that they're getting virtual schooling and, whatever, and do a real mind sweep, as we call it, just a data dump out of your head. Just get what has your attention. So, it's really all you have to do is start to identify everything that has your attention. And then you can then back it up from there. Then you need to clarify, okay, you wrote that down. You got it out of your head. Great. What's the next action? What do you need to do? And by the way, if one action won't finish whatever this thing is, then you've got a project. So you can build your projects. Oftentimes when we coach people, then when they're not in a kind of a crisis situation, the first thing to do is literally empty their head with everything that has their attention and then go through them one at a time and go, well, great. What's the next step? If there is one. There may not be. It might be reference material. It might be someday maybe I might do that. And it might be just, God, what a dumb idea. I don't need to do that at all. If it is something that you need to move on, if it's an actionable item, then what's the next action? And if one action won't finish it, what's the project? So that's a standard sort of workflow process that, the getting things done sort of solidified or formulated or identified really in terms of what you need to do. So that it's a pretty simple step. You don't have to go very far. Just go, hey, what's got your attention? Write it down. What's your next step? And is there some outcome past a one-step thing that you need to keep track of until it's done?
I'm just curious, as someone who also, advises systems and tries to take my own advice, is there a part about the getting things done theory or the advice you often give others that you personally struggle with the most? Like, what do you think is hardest about this? I'm sure, after many years, you've really kind of mastered it, but is there anything that still kind of gets your goat?
Nothing gets my goat so much as I'm just a fellow student. I just have to do everything everybody has to do all the time too. Come on. Well, it's kind of the better you get, the better you better get.
Right.
Because the better you get, the more mature you get, the more mature you get, the more complex your life gets. Not complicated, but complex.
Which actually,
stealing that from your book, by the way, that's a great distinction.
Yeah, no, It is, and actually, it brings me to another question I had planned to ask, which is when you were first originating this work and starting to kind of build this theory, were you aware of complexity as a concept, or did it sort of emerge and happen to work well in a complex environment?
The latter. Yeah, it just happens to work. I actually just reading your book said, oh yeah, I guess that's what this does. So 35 years later, I'm going, oh yeah, I guess this does. Well, I knew, I was slightly familiar with cybernetics many years ago.
Okay.
In the beginning of this. In other words, if you're trying to make something complex simple, you need an equally complex system in order to simplify it.
Right. Yeah, the law of requisite variety.
Yeah, and the problem is most people are trying to manage a very complex thing called life with too simple a system, and that makes it even worse. And let me spin that a little bit further, because one of the things I loved when Brian Robertson and I hooked up together, 10 years ago, where he sort of became religious about GTD, and then said, how come when I walk into my company, we kind of lose the mind like water space. And the whole idea is I can be really clear. Rodney, you and Aaron can be really clear personally, but as soon as we all get together, we just magnified exponentially the complexity that's going to happen relative to clarity of agreements. And so, Brian just did such an elegant job of really digging into, building a complex system that can, as best as possible anyway, sort of bring clarity to that complexity of people working together. That's a very different game than just individually implementing, getting things done. It's still the same principles.
Sure.
He calls it tension. I call it attention. What has your attention?
Well, and we think of it as fractal all the way up too. I mean, from the individual to the team of teams, to the org, to the society and culture. Like it's the same game everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that occurs to me when I think about getting things done and holacracy is the importance of making things explicit. And whether you're talking about, doing the data dump from your head, whether you're talking about in holacracy, keeping things like governance records and working agreements updated, there's a really heavy emphasis placed on articulation and documentation and having things out there. Can you just talk a little bit about why that's important, and also maybe why in a lot of systems there is a hesitance or a resistance to doing that?
I don't know that I have a good answer to the last question. I do know that one of the things over all my 35 years, or almost 40 years now in a consulting practice, is that when things are weird, all you have to do is go to current reality. What's a current reality? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what's real, what's true right now. And people just so tend to generalize. Oh my God, everybody's leaving the company. Well, who exactly is leaving the company? Well, Susan said she thought she might want to go. And so people then start to generalize, and exaggerate and overblow. And because they're not being explicit, they're emotionally reacting and responding, then trying to put a cognitive, framework on that. And that never works. There's no solution to that. I mean, come on, if you pull out a map, if you want to get somewhere, in Denver or in Durham, what's the first thing you look at? Where
you are.
Exactly. Yep. If you don't know where you are, even if the three of us can all agree on where we want to go. Sure. Hey, there's our goal. Wow. But if the three of us have a different perception of what current reality is, we're still going to want to shoot each other, because I'm going to say we need to turn left. You need to say we need to turn right. I'm going to say we need to go fast. You can say, no, we're close already, because we don't have agreement about what current reality is.
Yeah.
So the explicit, and that's why people often resist the getting things done process, because just from a personal standpoint, it's getting very explicit. What are your agreements with yourself?
Yes.
What's got your attention? And people resist it like the plague.
They do resist it.
Because it forces you to actually engage with it appropriately.
Yeah, and it forces you to get out of that sort of generalization and exaggeration that you described, that I think to us in moments of chaos or just in moments of discomfort, it can feel quite soothing in the moment, in the short term, to say everybody's leaving, Rome is burning, et cetera. and the discipline to articulate what is real and what is actually happening. Even though in the slightly longer term, that does help us and it does move us forward and it does feel better. It feels to me like there is a switch in there that we need to make
sure.
and be willing to make.
Well, it's a very subtle but very profound change. See, if I say Rome is burning, you only complain or worry about things that you assume or wish were different. You're just not engaged in making it so. And so those kind of generalizations allow you to blame the external world.
Yes.
And not do anything. And it allows you to then, relish your complaining and your victimizing of yourself. And see that the interesting thing, and where the getting things done principles really apply at a pretty sublime level, and actually universally, is that it's not as much about getting things done, physically working and getting stuff done, as it is being appropriately engaged with your life. So you're present with whatever's going on. So how do you get appropriately engaged with the pandemic? Are you appropriately engaged right now with your cat? Are you appropriately engaged with your desk? Are you appropriately engaged with this podcast? And it's all about appropriate engagement. And the things that have your attention is just things that are not yet appropriately engaged. That's not bad. That's not a negative. That's not a judgment. It's just saying there's still decisions about it you haven't made, or you haven't parked the results in some place that's going to trigger the appropriate action. And so that's why the algorithm, that I figured out over all these years about how do you get your head clear, how do you get present. That doesn't mean you don't have to like your life to get it off your mind. You certainly don't have to like the pandemic to be appropriately engaged with it. I'm not saying this is easy, guys, but I am saying that there's a big difference between complaining about it or worrying about it and being in the driver's seat about what are you going to do now, given the current situation and the current realities.
Right.
Yes. And that explains so clearly the sort of global worry that I personally have been holding. At a local level, I don't have a lot of personal individual anxiety, but I am worried globally. And I think you have just nailed exactly why. It's because I'm not actually doing anything really and really engaging. So if I'm a person who feels conscientious and like I want to be contributing and engaging meaningfully with what's going on in the environment right now, how do I get started?
Well, because
my dog's under control, my house is cool, my office is sorted, my work is great, but there is still, a virus killing the world. So where do I go?
Rodney, have you decided what you can't change about that?
No, I have not.
You didn't wake up this morning and go, gravity really sucks. It's causing, body parts are sagging. People are dying right now just because of gravity. And very few people complained about gravity, right? What do you do with gravity? The three things you do with it: you accept it, ignore it, or play with it. There's the Olympics or the gravity games, right? And so I'm not saying this is easy to move your mind into that mindset that said, okay, I'm going to accept, there are a whole lot more people that die from malaria than the pandemic ever, and yet nobody's yelling and screaming about malaria, right? It just happens to be hitting people that are quite conscious and quite verbally expressive and cognitively expressive, and, and it never happened to them before, so, you have to, it's kind of that old thing. What can you change? Have the grace to accept what you can't change, and then decide what you can change, and then appropriately engage with that. So I'm not sitting here thinking I can change the spread of the pandemic. Not at all. Best thing I can do is maintain a light consciousness, and send my best wishes to the whole thing whenever I meditate or whenever I, move into that sort of, an internal state where I'm just, trying to send my best wishes and best energies around the world to anybody that can use it. So that's kind of my working hypothesis, that we all have the ability to do that, and that it does have an effect. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm not bothered by, I can't do anything else.
What you're talking about is very inspiring, and it's also very challenging to assumptions and to habits and to sort of the norms of most people. But it also, I think, calls into question how much is enough? So, one of the things that's interesting is what you're talking about. It sounds very disciplined and, not robotic, but it could go that route of like, I'm sort of following the algorithm. I'm identifying, I'm using my attention effectively. I'm doing the work that I want to do and having the meaning and the impact I want to have in the world. But we're also human beings. We're made of atoms, and we have limitations, and we can only be effective for so long. So when you think about, like, especially right now in this moment with all the different things going on, how much is enough work? How much is enough output? How much is enough getting things done?
As much as you need to get it off your mind.
So you're the barometer.
Yeah, of course. Well, my priority is a clear head.
Right.
What do I need to do to get clear again? Maybe I need to take a nap. Maybe I need to have a beer. Maybe I need to just do nothing for about 10 minutes and see what happens. Maybe I need to, put my shoulder to the wheel and grind away and crank out this ugly email response I got to sit down and deal with. I don't know. It's whichever thing I think will make the biggest difference in terms of getting me back to clear again, getting me back to present again. See, the unfortunate thing is productivity has got a lot of baggage as a word.
Yeah.
Just say people, you say you're going to be more productive. I'm going to sweat more, work harder, do more stuff. And yet if you go to a party to boogie and you don't boogie, it's an unproductive party. Right? You take a vacation to relax and you don't relax, it's an unproductive vacation. See, productivity simply means achieving some sort of desired outcome. And everybody's already productive because you're producing exactly what you're experiencing right now. What most people mean when they say, I want to be more productive is for the amount of energy I'm putting in now, I'd like to have more money, more physical things, more material output. Or it could very well be, I want to be able to get the same amount of material output with less effort. Or it could be, I'd like to have this experience. I'd like to feel happy this afternoon. Right? So that's a desired outcome. And then whether you're happy or not will be by your own self-determination, how productive your afternoon was. But so if we could get rid of the word productivity, maybe it's just because of all the baggage to it. But, again, it's still, you're not going to get rid of that word because it's a very profound word. It means produce.
Right.
And you can't stop producing. You're producing all the time. So I would, again, appropriate engagement. So appropriate engagement could very well be do nothing for 3 days. I'm not sure what I want to do now that my life has changed that much. When do you think you need to make a decision by? The sand is running out of my checking account. Probably in a month, I better make some decision if I haven't by then. Great. Why don't you put a little trigger in your system so a month from now, say, gee, hey, dude, have you decided about X? And then you get to relax and then let yourself bang around because you've built into your external system a trigger to remind you of the appropriate thing at the right time. That's appropriate engagement with ambiguity.
I think the unfortunate thing about, the productivity internet is that there's so little talk about those reflections and that, like, tuning into the self and the needs and like what's going on with me. And there's a lot more of like, the work week should be 40 hours. You should only do 4 hours of, this a day. It turns into this very numerical, very kind of keeping score kind of game. And what I think is at the essence of your model, your mental model and your approach is a lot more about sensing and about, intuition and about tuning in to your own lived reality, which I guess is, I don't know, too fluffy for the folks that are out there trying to make $1 billion. I don't get it, but yeah. I think there's a missing piece there.
Well, one of my coaches at one point said, ultimately she just had to ask somebody, said, well, how conscious do you want to be?
I enjoy that very much.
I like that from my bartender as well.
Okay, come on. And again, I'm not really a proselytizer. I'm not at all. My game, and I'm not even a very good trainer. I'm a pretty good presenter, but I just figured out the model, and the people can do with it what they want. Now, the truth is, anybody starts to implement this in any way, shape, or form, they're going to improve the condition. And you don't have to implement the whole thing. Come on, any little piece. This is not running with scissors. Anything. You write down a few more things than you normally do, you're going to feel more in control. Mm-hmm. You decide just a next action a little sooner than you normally would, you're going to feel more like you're on your game and in the saddle of your life. So you don't have to do major transformation in order to get yourself a lot more present and a lot more productive in the broadest, and the most positive sense of what we're talking about.
And have you noticed, Aaron and I were talking recently in another episode just about noticing sort of the mood that we see out in the world and, on social media and things like that, and sort of what people are hungering for. And one of the things that both of us had noticed is that a lot of us do feel like there are a lot of things out of our control right now and are looking for ways in which to regain some semblance of control in our lives. Are you seeing that? And is that leading people to your work in this moment of complexity and chaos?
I don't really know. Because in a sense, I'm not. I would imagine for a number of people that it is, especially people who already know something of the getting things done model. At least some of the folks that I've said, it's like, wow, I'm refining my own getting things done game now because I have an opportunity to do that. And so, there's certainly that's the top end of the population, I think, out there. I think most people probably don't have the time or feel like they don't have the opportunity to stop and, kind of reformat and reframe their systems. And because I'm not really out there hands-on, not much. My work is primarily supporting now all of our licensed, partners and licensees and certified trainers and coaches around the world that are doing the work now, really more than I am personally. But, it's my advice, for anybody who's asking is, hey, guys, it's a great time. If nothing else, clean up your desk. If nothing else, when in doubt, clean a drawer, because this will end. There will be a post-virus world. And, I always recommend to people that even before there was any kind of a crisis, I said, sometimes it's a good idea to take a whole day and do all the secondary stuff you've been avoiding that just, sucking wind out of your sails. The batteries you need to buy, the light bulb you need to get from the hardware store, the thing you got to take to the tailor because you need it fixed, et cetera, that you just never get to when you're so busy out there, doing what you're doing. And so sometimes it's good to take a whole day and do all that dumb little dorky stuff that you're still going to have to do anyway. So now might be a really good time to do that. It kind of forces you to assume and have hope and faith that there will be a post world, here. But this is a great time to clean up because you won't do it once the world starts up again.
Oh, I've dedicated a whole week to that at least so far.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes it feels like you have control when you dial into that minutia. Those are easy things to get done. Just like move those rocks.
Well, and now purging just means fewer things that I have to keep track of. So it's like, now's a great time to clean out the closets because it gives me more space psychologically to deal with the world.
And Rodney, the funny thing about that is, even though that's like, let's go do the mundane, the Marie Kondo stuff. Let me go through my closet and see whatever. Is that what's fascinating is how many inspiring things about the bigger parts of your life actually tend to show up while you're doing that.
Yes.
While you're doing that. Oh God, that reminds me. Oh, that's a good idea. I ought to. And that invariably happens with me whenever I tackle one of those drawers. I'll bet you guys both have. I don't know. I'll ask you. Everybody I know has got the weird electronics drawer.
Sure.
The thing crapped out, but the charger, I might need.
I might need that
someday.
I might need that.
This goes to something.
That thing is good. Oh my God. And then there's all kinds of stuff in there. You don't even know what the hell it is. You threw it in there because that seemed to be the perfect place for it, and it actually was. Here's my crappy, weird, strange. I don't know what it is. Electronics drawer. And so if you actually sit down one day and decide, I'm going to curate this thing, and you actually start to go through it, you'll be surprised, how many cool thoughts you have and creative thoughts you have that aren't just about what's in that drawer while you're doing that.
Yeah, I have noticed that. It's, a little bit of the shower principle when you're cleaning out the closet. And I have also noticed that in doing some of those more mundane things, there's also a lot of nostalgia. And I'm not a particularly nostalgic person, but right now, for I'm sure what are real psychological reasons, I am just having like more vivid memory than I usually do about things long past. And so there is something about going through various corners of a home where you're like, oh, right, remember when I read that book, or remember when I wore that hat, or remembered the trip where I took that bag. And there's something very comforting about that right now. So, the closet time, I think, personally, I've noticed, can be great for ideas, but it can also be great for being transported to other, maybe easier moments.
Not only that, I wrote I think there's a chapter in my book, the Ready for Anything book, called "The Magic of the Mundane," and
Mm.
to spin this back around to previous topic here in terms of the explicitness, the necessity for explicitness, because when you get down to the kind of gory, mundane, right now details of stuff, it's amazing how many cool things show up that are much more subtle and sublime than just the thing you're looking at, but that you'd never see if you didn't deal with the real details of the mundane about what you need to do. So there is a magic to all of that. That's also, it can also be highly productive and highly inspiring. Not just about the nostalgia stuff. I agree. I mean, that's all cool stuff as well. But I mean, there really is a real good reason to get down and say, well, let me look exactly at what my bank account is doing. Let me look exactly at what is going on here. And from a holacratic, standpoint, what literally has somebody's attention right now? Where is the tension, and get very specific about what that tension is, because you can't do anything about it until you do.
I have the unique fortune and misfortune of being married to a woman who was a professional home organizer in the likes of Marie Kondo. And so for me to have mundane drawers full of random things, I have to squirrel them away. And then they have to be hidden and not discovered. And then some weekend, it's put before me and it's like, hey, you got to go through this. So I'm living with an intuitive GTD expert. But it is, it's still there.
But, I make a point. I know it sounds kind of facetious, but there really is a point to it. I say, I've got a big group of people and I'm giving a lecture or a seminar or whatever. I say, how many of you have a bunch of crap you just don't want to deal with? Everybody raises their hand. I say, well, here's a way you get to walk free of that. Get yourself a big cardboard box and a big magic marker and label the box "crap I don't want to deal with" and put it all in there. You get to walk free. Now you've clarified specifically what this means to me. That's like the electronic stuff. I don't know what the hell this thing is. Here's where those things go that I don't know what the hell it is, and I might need at some point.
Check mark.
Right. So that's where I might disagree with the Marie Kondo spin on stuff.
I love it.
Like, it is absolutely fine as long as there's also need to have some implicit agreement that on some consistent basis you'll rummage back through it again, and it's fine that you're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's serving a purpose for you, to your point, right?
Exactly.
If you're, it's doing that thing you need to do.
The someday maybe list is a euphemism for crap I don't want to deal with or think about right now.
Right. Yeah. Same box, just virtually.
Right.
So I'm curious, given all your experience with this and given this, I think, very liminal space we're in right now, where what's going to happen next is uncertain and interesting. What's next for you? Like, what are you intentional about or interested in terms of your work right now?
Well, we've kind of re-identified our purpose is, building a world and just supporting a world where there are no problems, only projects. So, if I can make a small dent of that before I check out of the planet, I'll feel really good. And so it's like, okay, so at what level is that right now? And that's really just kind of ranging around and dynamically steering about, well, where are people interested in knowing about what I've found out? And where can I place it? And how do I leverage that? See, it took me 20 or 25 years to figure out what I'd figured out, and that nobody else had figured it out, and that it was unique, and that it was bulletproof. That's when I wrote the book. Mm-hmm. And then I said, well, it'd probably take the rest of my life to figure out how to make it stick, and how to market it and get anybody to buy into it. So, and that I'm not an expert at. So I'm just kind of fumble around and just make sure we're trying to find the right people in the right places to be as efficient as I can with as little effort as possible to reach as many people as possible with what I've discovered in my life. So that could take a lot of different forms, for the last year or two, and probably, will continue for the next few years is supporting our licensees, around the world, because they're building their businesses, and a lot of them have dedicated their businesses now to supporting the getting things done methodology in their own countries and regions and markets. And so helping them do that. And so that's a lot of what my focus is. So I do a lot of correspondence, and I do a lot of at least, before the pandemic anyway. I was in Kiev with our new licensee there. I was in Moscow with our licensee there. I was in Tel Aviv with our new licensee there. I was in Athens with our new licensee there. And spending time just kind of shoulder to shoulder and because there were a lot of pirates for GTD out there. And so once we finally had a model where we could build exclusive licensees in these territories, helpful for me to show up and, stand shoulder to shoulder with them and get press and let the world know, hey guys, these are the real guys. So that's a lot of what I've been doing and will continue to do.
We have a lot of empathy for that. The interplay between feeling like you've figured something out or have a better way, and then figuring out how to spread that when it involves behavior change and mindset change and culture change and all those things that are slow going. So it is a life's work. For people who are listening who are saying, all right, I want to do something about this in the next week or in the next day, I'm going to sit down and take action. What would you advise, just given the model, as kind of parting wisdom for folks that maybe haven't done this work before and want to get started? What's kind of like the 3 first steps or something like that?
Yeah. Well, there's the kind of just informal, without having to learn what GTD or getting things done model is. The informal stuff is just, come on, guys, just empty your heads. Do a mind sweep. Get what has your attention and write all that stuff down. Get yourself an in tray and an in basket if you don't have one. Write all those different ideas and things to do. I need cat food. Write it on a piece of paper. Throw it in your in basket. Gee, I need to hire a vice president. Write it on a piece of paper. Throw it in your in basket. We need a new washing machine. Whatever all that is. And so, as much of that as you feel, that you can, in a half an hour, you can get a lot of stuff out of there. Most people have a lot more than they realize, and that just be a first thing. Is what's got your attention given the new situation, and just to make that list. That's gonna feel a lot different just by externalizing that, getting out of your head. Your head is just a crappy office, and most people are still trying to manage all this stuff in their head. And your head, you can't do it. It just I discovered 35 years ago, this, but now in the last 10 or 15 years, the cognitive scientists have, basically validated, and they've run tests and proven the fact that, trying to keep things in your head. As soon as you have more than 4 things you're trying to remember, remind, prioritize, or manage the relationship between them, you're going to lose your cognitive, abilities.
Right.
I was interviewing Daniel Levitin not long ago. He wrote The Organized Mind. His new book, by the way, Successful Aging, is a great book. Anyway, I was talking to Daniel. He's a serious cognitive science researcher, and I mentioned the 4 things in your head. That seems to be some of the newer data. He said, "David, that's wrong." I said, "Wrong?" He said, "Yeah, 2." So I guess the world is kind of getting that way. So that's just informally, without having to even understand what the GTD methodology is. That's step 1 of the GTD methodology. Now, if you have some bandwidth and actually want to start to implement this, and it'll be extremely powerful. We had just published in the last few months, we published the Getting Things Done workbook, which, simplifies engaging with the Getting Things Done methodology. My book, Getting Things Done, can be quite daunting because I put 35 years of my experience into the book. But if you wanted to really get started, we've had some really good instructional designers help us with setting that up. So, the Getting Things to Work, the 10 moves, that'll get you into the GTD game. And it's not like offline stuff. You'll actually be doing what we're talking about. So you'll be making good decisions and getting much more in control of your world just by walking yourself through the workbook if you feel like, doing it. So it's available in bookstores.
It certainly seems like this is a good moment for that.
Indeed.
better now than ever to get yourself ready to go. And it also seems like a good moment to draw things to a close. So let me say, David, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Yay. And this is fun, guys. Hopefully it's useful for you.
I think it is.
And hey, everyone, if you could do us a solid like Natalie did and write us a review, which she also sent to me, which I continue to love reading, that would be amazing. We appreciate it. Y'all are helping us reach larger and larger audiences every week, which is so, so, so great. So thank you.
And as always, a quick tip of the hat to Taylor Marvin for making us sound good. Brave New Work is produced by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. You can get in touch with us by emailing podcast@theready.com. And as for you, thanks for listening. Now go change something.